slight change in plans. What we're going to do is make this into an end table. Yay. And I'm going to use as minimal tools as possible and do it as easy as possible. Now I'm pretty sure this is black walnut, which is the same kind of wood that I used to make the big coffee table. So I want to do the same concept with that. I want to have rivers running through it with the same colors. Now to stay with the same concept as the big table, I want rivers running through that. So I'm going to have to break it into 3 to 4 pieces. Luckily, there's already cracks running through it that I could probably just smash. In order to break this, all I'm going to do is stick this 2x4 under, slam the biscuit down on it, and hopefully it will crack right where those predefined cracks are. You might be able to see the cracks running through here, so hopefully it's going to crack right there. Easy peasy. That felt great. Now I want to do it to this right here. Works like a charm. It's broken into 3. I'm not a particular fan of it. I don't like just the way it looks. I want one more crack running right there. So let's see if we can break that one too. Starting to. Boom. So this is going to be the basic layout of the table. I want to use that same kind of dark epoxy that I used on the last table in this one. I'm just going to have it running straight through here. And just like the last table, what I'm going to run it into is the fact that the epoxy is going to go all the way out here to the edge, but I don't want it coming all the way out. So we're going to have to do the same thing again that I did last time and tape that up. But there's still a lot of work that has to be done in this before we even get to the epoxy. So these pieces of wood are called biscuits or rounds or slabs, depending on who's selling it. They're all the same thing. It's just a slab cut straight out of the tree trunk. The great thing about these, they're much, much cheaper than a full slab of wood, and they still look great. And you can pick them up just about anywhere. You can find these all over Facebook Marketplace. You can go to any lumber place and get them. They're very plentiful. And if you want to experiment with live edge or epoxy, these could be a great place to start. And like I said, the first thing that we need to do is clean this up. And what I mean by that is we have to take the bark off and we have to take all of this loose wood off. And the reason you need to take the bark off, because it decays over time and it becomes very, very brittle and it would just start chipping off the table. That's why you really don't see bark on a lot of live edge tables. So that's why you gotta clean these up. You gotta take everything that's brittle and could fall off, take it off now, which is why you gotta go through the inside, take off all that really brittle wood, take off all the bark so it doesn't fall off later. Because as cool as this bark looks, you don't want that happening when this is a finished table. Now, ideally, what you would want to use to take this bark off and clean up all this loose wood would be a very sharp chisel, a wire wheel attachment for a grinder or a drill, but let's pretend you don't have any of that. But you do have a flathead screwdriver. Perfectly fine. Just take your flathead screwdriver and just work it between the bark and the wood. It's going to take a while, but it still works just fine. So, bark is off using nothing but a screwdriver and a hammer. On to the next step. So now, we have to get rid of all the loose little stuff. Ideally, what you would want to use is a wire wheel or a grinder attachment for a drill or a grinder. But let's say we don't have that. You could use something like this. It's a rasp. It's got very coarse edges. It's great for ripping material off. But if you don't have one of these, still no problem. Sandpaper. This is incredibly coarse 40 grit sandpaper. I'm going to use this because everybody can get one of these. So we're just taking the sandpaper and just sanding all of that rough stuff off. All of that loose bits on here, just sand it off. Now I would avoid using a sander right now because you're not really going to get what you want off the sander. Just use your hand in a very rough grit sandpaper and just rip it down. Always make sure to flip it over and do it again because you're going to see more loose stuff. Take it all off. Done. Okay, so all the edges are done and they're cleaned up. Ready for the next step. Okay, this part you're gonna need a sander. Well, you don't have to have a sander. You can hand sand it, but I'm not gonna do that. No way. Now for the sander, use whatever you have. I'm gonna use this one because it's got a pretty good dust collection system on it, and I'm having a little bit of trouble breathing because I do have a pretty terrible dust collection system down here. Something I'm gonna address in a later video. Now for the sandpaper, I'm using 180 grit just because we're trying to smooth this surface out, because this has a lot of deep cuts from when it was cut off the tree. So that's all we're trying to do right now, is just smooth the surface down. So this is what we're trying to smooth out. All these little lines is when the saw was going through, it was cutting and making these deep grooves. This is what we want to smooth off so you can see all the nice patterns in the wood. So just keep sanding till these are all gone. Okay, so my sanding is completely done. Don't forget you gotta do the front and the back. Now, how well you do the back, completely up to you. For this project, I'm keeping this, so I did the back about 50 to 75% as well as I did the top. Now, if I were giving this away or trying to sell it, I would do the back just as well as I did the top. But like I said, since this is mine, I only did about half as well as I did the top. All I did was surface it, take off some of those imperfections, some of the big grooves, and that's it. And that's good enough for me. So this also brings up, how long does it take to sand? I watch a lot of these project videos and they always talk about, now you sand, then they talk about how bad sanding is or how boring it is, and then cut to it's done. It takes a long time. If you're sanding and you're on hour 2 or 3 and you're thinking, there's no way this is going right, I'm doing it wrong, something's not working, you're doing it perfectly fine. Sanding is just one of the most time-consuming, tedious, boring things of this project. It takes hours. Just for example, I started with 180 grit on this, and just on one of the surfaces, I was about 30 minutes deep before I was even finished with it. So then I switched over to an 80 grit. It did cut that time in half, but I still spent about 20 to 25 minutes per surface per side. So it takes a long time. You just have to be patient with it. But now with the sanding done, it's time to move on to the next part. So the next part is putting a thin protective layer of tabletop epoxy across. The best way to describe why we do this part is just to show you. To show why we put a protective coat of epoxy down, I'm just going to drill some shallow holes into this plain piece of 2x4. Then I'm going to divide the board into two sides. One is going to be coated with epoxy and the other is going to be left plain. I'm just putting a normal thin layer down on just one side. Now I'm going to fill the holes with black epoxy. I'm also not trying to be neat. I do want to get epoxy kind of all over the board. Now that the epoxy is cured, I'm going to sand both sides of the board. I'm just sanding until the only epoxy left is what's in the holes. Remember, this is without the protective coat, and this is with the protective coat. You could see how much bleeding or dyeing occurred from the black epoxy soaking into the wood. See how the holes have a bleeding effect coming out? Now this is with a protective coat. See how clean each one is and there's no bleeding or dyeing around the rest of the wood? This is why we do it. Along with that dyeing or the bleeding effect that you get from colored epoxy, another reason why you want to put that protective layer on there is there is a lot of air within this wood. And when you seal it up with that protective layer, it's going to hold that air in. So that way when you do the deep pour, those air bubbles don't come out and cause big air bubbles within the deep pour. But before you put the protective layer on, you have to clean these really, really well. So what I do to clean these is I vacuum it first, and then I use an air compressor to blow off all those little nooks and crannies. So if you don't have an air compressor to blow off all the nooks and crannies, don't worry about it. It's not that big of a deal. Just make sure you get it really well with the shop vac, and make sure you have one of these little scrubby tops, because that's going to really help getting all the little cracks and get all the dust out of there. And then I do my absolute favorite part. I'll clean it with some basic mineral spirits. So the reason this is my absolutely favorite thing to do, damn it. God, I hope this stuff's not bad for you. The reason why this is one of my absolute favorite things to do, as soon as you put the mineral spirits on it, it really brings out what the final product is going to look like. This is your first image of what it's going to look like. You can actually really see what the grain's gonna end up look like, how it's gonna look. You can start to see how dark it's end up gonna be. See, so this is pretty much what the end result's gonna look like. You could really see all the rings all the way through it, the coloration of it. I love this part. But after you got done with that and you wiped it all the way down with mineral spirits, now you just have to let it dry. And in the meantime, just go ahead and start mixing up your tabletop epoxy. Now, when I mix up the tabletop epoxy, I always use one of these pre-measured cups. You can get them on Amazon for like a pack of 200 for pretty cheap. It makes it really easy because most tabletop epoxies are a 1-to-1 ratio. One of my favorite tabletop epoxies is this Pro Marine. I've used it a couple times and so far it's one of my favorites. It's a 2-part A and B. It's a hardener and not hardener, I'm not sure, just the epoxy. But it's a 50-50 ratio. It comes out nice and smooth. It doesn't bubble up too bad. I like it. But if you use something else before and you like it, go with that or experiment. Now, when the wood's fully dried and your epoxy's mixed up and you're ready to apply it, you're gonna wanna use just a regular crappy brush that you're willing to throw away because there's no saving these. It's completely garbage when you're done. Now, when you go to apply it, you're just gonna wanna apply a nice thin layer across the top and the inner edges. I'm not going to do the outer part here because I want it to be left exposed. If you want to, feel absolutely free. Do whatever you want to do. So now, after you have the epoxy all over where you want it to be, there's one thing you need to do. You can't get away from it. You have to have a torch. Now, what kind of little torch you use, completely up to you. I love this one. It's just a little kitchen one for creme brulees. It was like 25 bucks on Amazon. It's easily refillable with one of these little butane ones. I like it because it's very controllable. It doesn't get too hot. You'll see some people using the big ones. I used one of those a couple times. I think it just gets too hot and you could burn the epoxy. So the reason you need one of these is you need to pop the bubbles. When you start pouring the epoxy on or you brush it on, you get these little micro bubbles all over the place. So if you just run this across it, it will pop all of those bubbles. Now when you do it, just hit it and go over it real quick. That's all you need to do. Hold it a couple inches away and just go over it real quick. What that's going to do is pop all of those surface bubbles and also do the sides too. Now, one thing you don't want to do is if you see some bubbles, don't stop and try to burn those bubbles away. That's just going to burn the epoxy and it's going to look terrible. If you have some persistent bubbles, just go over them a couple times, move on, come back to them, they'll eventually pop. Now, to show you exactly what I'm talking about with popping the bubbles, this is some black epoxy I made up and you'll see some bubbles right there, right in the middle. So if you just touch them with the torch, see how they popped? And they'll completely go away. And then it will settle itself back out and become perfectly smooth. But did you see how fast that happened? You don't need to hold the flame on it for very long for it to work. So these bubbles will continue to come up for the next couple of hours. So you're gonna have to come back, hit it about maybe, at first, do it about every half hour, then you'll start to see less and less bubbles and you can start coming back maybe once an hour, but just keep coming back until you finally see no more bubbles and then just let it cure. But for now, the tabletop epoxy is on there. The bubbles are popped for right now, so all I'm gonna do is come back once an hour or so, check it, and I'll see you when it's cured. Okay, so we're back. It's been about 3 days. This is fully cured and it looks great. All the edges are nice and sealed up. We're ready for the next step. But there's something I want to show you that could happen. So if you run into this issue where there's a little drippage on the bottom half of it, maybe a little pooling right here from where it was sitting on the table, that's no big deal at all. It's super easy to fix. Now, if you have a small chisel, you can just go ahead and knock them right off and then sand it. But if you don't have a chisel, still no problem. Just use a sander and sand it flat. It has to be nice and flat because these have to sit flat on your frame. So let's just go ahead and take care of this. So let's take the chisel, put it right here on the edge, and just a couple little taps. It will pop right off. But like I said, if you don't have a chisel like this, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and sand it. I'm just using a chisel because it makes the sanding a little bit faster because I'm not sanding all the way down. Go ahead, grab your sander and just go ahead and sand this all down. Now, if you still have a little pooling, like a little edge like this, you can either just take a razor blade, cut that off. You can sand it lightly. Just don't try to sand into this part, which you already sealed up. Or, like I said, you can just use your chisel, knock it off, whatever way you want to do it. I'm just going to use a razor blade because most people do have a razor blade. Just go ahead, take it off. There we go. Easy as that. Now we're ready. So the material that we're going to be using to build the frame is called melamine. You can get it from any big box store. It comes in sheets of like 2 foot by 4 foot or 4 foot by 8 foot. So there's a couple reasons why you want to use melamine. First, it's very, very smooth. It's flat, it's level. It already comes that way, so you don't have to worry about leveling anything off. You don't have to worry about waves or anything in the surface of it. So it's going to create a nice flat surface for your table. Second, it has this coating on the surface. It's a very waxy, slippery surface. Epoxy has a very hard time sticking to it. Now, it can stick to it. It is not completely stick resistant. Sometimes the epoxy will stick to it. It's happened to me. Oh, this is not going well. Super strength. But there's a couple things that we could do to prevent that 100%, and we're going to do that. But first, we got to build the frame. Okay, so when you're building your frame, first thing you want to do is stage your wood. You want to do that, just get an idea of how big this is going to need to be. So this is how I want mine to look. I want there to be a crack through here, about 1 inch wide. So when the epoxy goes through here, we're going to see a nice crack through here. It's going to be nice and black. Should look really good. So this is how big the base of my frame needs to be. So you want it to be a little bit wider, because what you're going to have to do is take some more melamine, cut it off the same piece, and you're going to build walls around it. But back to what I was talking about earlier, how I'm going to keep the epoxy in is just tape this up, because there's really no way I could build a frame tight around this to keep the epoxy in. That's why I'm just going to put tape over the end here and then pour the epoxy in and hope the tape holds. But now there's a possibility the tape might not hold, and the epoxy could leak out. That's why I want to put walls around this. Because trust me, the first time that you have epoxy leak out of a mold, it's a complete disaster. There's really no stopping it. It can go everywhere. It ruins basically anything it touches. So just be careful with it and just go overboard with trying to make sure you contain this whole entire project. Okay, since I don't want to work on this giant sheet of 4x8 melamine, what I'm going to do is just go ahead, cut this corner out for the base. That way it's a lot easier to work with. It's much more manageable, a lot lighter. Okay, the easiest way to do this is just go ahead, center this over here where the edge is. You don't need to sage this exactly how you want it. We just need to get it close. Now, don't forget, when you're doing this, you've got to put walls all the way around here. Now, how you do that is completely up to you. You can put walls butted up against here and put screws through this way, or you can put them on top and drive the screws up through that way. It's completely up to you. For me, I'm gonna put the walls butted up right up against here and put the screws straight in through that way. So that way I can just go ahead and push this right over to here and leave as little room as possible between where this edge would be and the wall edge. So go ahead and just rough it in there. Like I said, doesn't need to be perfect. Okay, so now I gotta measure how long I want it to be. So it's gonna be from this edge up to here. So I want it to be about 25 inches. So take a measurement from here to here, 25 inches over here, 25 inches over there. Now, how wide? Probably gonna be about the same. Actually, the widest part is gonna be 24 inches. Let's go ahead and mark your 24 inches. Let's move this out of the way. Now let's take a straight edge. And now I have the lines for the frame. So all I have to do now is go ahead and cut that out. Now to cut this out, use whatever you have. If you have a jigsaw, a circular saw, a big enough table saw, use whatever you have. It doesn't really matter. You just got to get it cut out. All right, so while we have the saw out and everything's all dusty, let's just go ahead and start cutting the walls. I'm gonna use this little chunk over here because it's 25 inches long, which is plenty long enough for all of the edges. So now with this being 2.5 inches thick, this being about 3/4 inch thick, that gives me about 3¼ inches I need. So I'm just gonna round that up to 3.5 inches. So I will need 4 3.5-inch thick strips. Okay, so the walls are cut out, the base is cut out, and the wood's ready to go. So now the next step would be just go ahead, tape this guy up and get him ready for the pour. So I'm not gonna put the walls on yet, because don't forget, we're still gonna tape up all these corners and all these edges, and I want plenty of room to work. Then after everything's all taped up, I wanna actually run some sealant around the bottom just to prevent any kind of leaks in this. And then after that's done, then I'll put the walls on and seal the walls up. Then we'll be ready. But before we get to taping this, what I want to do is prep the surface of the actual base. Remember I was telling you sometimes the epoxy does stick to this melamine, so a way to prevent that is using Tyvek tape. All you gotta do is put Tyvek tape all over this and it's not going to stick. Nothing actually sticks to the surface of Tyvek tape, that's why it's so good. Now you can also use a packing tape. It doesn't work as well as Tyvek tape, but also a small roll of Tyvek tape is $15 and a small roll of packing tape is like $1. So you be the judge on that one. Now another option is a silicone lubricant. This is kind of hit or miss when you're using melamine. Mostly miss. I've tried it a couple times. It has ruined a couple projects when I'm working with melamine and this stuff, but this works really well if you're using a silicone mold, something like a coaster mold, or they make a lot of different molds for cheese trays and serving trays. This will work really well with one of those. I would avoid it with melamine and just stick with a Tyvek tape or packing tape. Okay, that's it. Now we'll move on to the next part. Okay, so for taping up the edges, I tested a bunch of different kind of tapes to see which one would work the best. Black Gorilla Tape worked the best as far as sticking to the exposed wood, and the epoxy wasn't sticking to it. So that's the one I'm going to use. Okay, first what I'm going to do is actually take the tape and tape this edge up. Then I'm going to take another piece of tape and lay it over this to cover up the channel. So that way when I pour the epoxy, it's going to go up to here, hopefully hit that tape and stop. Okay, so this is what I'm trying to do. See how I got a nice little lip here? That way when I pour the epoxy into these little cracks, it should just fill up that nicely, hit the tape, stop, but it won't stick to the tape. That way I can just peel it right off. And then on the bottom, I went ahead and it's nice and lined up just perfectly. I stopped right here on the edges. So now all I gotta do is do that to all of these. All right, so all the edges are fully sealed up and I think they're gonna hold perfectly fine. Now what we wanna do is tape over these gaps. In order to do that, we have to put this exactly where you want it to be because I don't want it moving around a little bit and the tape get all kind of floppy and cause gaps. So I'm gonna put this exactly where I want it to be, tape up these edges as good as I possibly can. All right, I think that looks good. Now what I'm gonna do is put some heavy things on here so that way it doesn't move around. All right, so let's start sealing some of these edges up. Get on it just as good as I can. I want to be nice and taut, so I don't want the tape to be sinking in. I think that would work. See, there's a little gap right there. I'm just going to keep putting tape over it until I like it. Okay. Some more. Across the top. Okay. Now I'm going to actually fold a piece into an L and put it right across here. Hopefully it sticks enough to that Tyvek tape. Push it in. Try to tuck it in as well as I can. There. Okay, let me show you what we got. Okay, so this is what it's looking like. I think it's pretty well. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere. So I don't think that one's gonna go anywhere, but I'm just gonna go ahead and do the rest of them. So now everything is all taped up. The big gaps are taped up. I think it's gonna hold pretty well. Now what I'm going to do is use this adhesive sealant, go all the way around the bottom of the edge, to make sure it's fully sealed up, and this is also going to help it from moving around or floating. So just go right across this edge. Fill it all in. You want nothing getting out. If you see any small gap in the tape, go ahead, hit it with the caulk. Fill it up. This is your last line of defense from leaking. All right, so everything is taped up, caulked up, and sealed up. You might think this is a little bit overkill as far as sealing it. Trust me, it's not. The last thing you want this thing to do is leak. Epoxy is not cheap and you don't want to waste it. So now what I'm going to do is just go ahead, let this sit for 24 hours and let the caulk dry. And then after 24 hours, I'm going to come back, I'm going to put the walls on and we can go ahead and start pouring. So while the caulk is drying, what we could do is figure out how much epoxy we actually need. Now the easiest way to do that is just use an epoxy calculator online. If you just Google epoxy calculator, there's tons of different ones. They all really do the same thing. I happen just to use the one from Total Boat. So what you want to do is figure out the total length of the area that you're going to be pouring the epoxy into. Now I have 2 full-length cracks. Each one is 25 inches long, so I'll need a total of 50 inches. And they're roughly about 1 inch wide. And the thickness is basically the depth. So the wood is 2.5 inches thick. And that's going to show I need 125 cubic inches or 69 ounces or a half a gallon. Now I have 3/4 gallon of epoxy, so I'm just going to use the whole thing. It's always good to have a little bit extra. And that's how you figure out how much epoxy you're going to need for your pour. Okay, the silicone is fully dried. Now we're going to put the walls on. All we have to do is set them right here. And then I'm just using these basic 1 1/4 inch drywall screws. That's all you need. You don't need to get anything fancy. And we're just going to go ahead and put maybe 4 of them on each side. Now when you cut these, make sure one edge overlaps the other one, so you get this nice tight butt joint right on the inside. Okay, so the walls are on, everything looks nice and secure. Next part is you're going to need some levels. You can either use a big one like this or a little one like this. It really doesn't matter. I like a little one just because you're going to be setting it on the inside of the frame to make sure this is perfectly level. So what you want to do is take a smaller level, put it on the inside of the frame. Don't put it on top of the wood and don't put it on the walls, because those might be a little off, your wood might be a little wobbly. Put it on the inside of the frame where the epoxy is going to sit. So you want it to be perfectly level, because if it's not, what's going to happen is all the epoxy will settle down towards one end, and you may need to pour more and more and more epoxy trying to fill up one side while the other side's just overflowing. So it has to be level so the epoxy settles level. So hopefully you could see I got the level in here and I have the bubble in there. It's basically perfect. And when you're doing this, make sure you check in all directions. If you're going this way, turn it this way, because it might be tipped up this way or front to back, whichever way, just check it. So now mine needs to come up on this end about 1/16 of an inch, not much. And if you have shims, use them, great. But if you don't, that's okay. Just fold up some paper or anything. Wedge it on here just to get it nice and level. All right, so everything is level, it's clean, it's ready. Now we're on to the most important part and the funnest part, the epoxy. So we already figured out how much epoxy we need by using the calculator. So all we need to do now is just go ahead and get it mixed up, colored, and go ahead and pour it. But I do want to tell you some tips about the epoxy. There's a couple things to always remember when using deep pour epoxy or any kind of epoxy. Temperature is extremely important. Read the directions on what the temperature needs to be, because it will drastically affect how the epoxy dries. If it's too cold, it will never dry. If it's too hot, it cures too quickly and we start getting bubbles and ugly colors in it, or it might not even cure at all. Luckily, I'm doing this in my basement, so the temperature stays pretty much exactly the same year round. But if you're doing this outside in the garage or just outside, you're going to run into a lot of issues if the temperature is going up and down between night and day. Try to do this in an area where you can control the temperature. Next is about the coloring. So there's 2 different ways you can color epoxy. You can either use mica powders or you can use liquid drops. There is a huge difference in the way they look. If you're using a powder, it comes out like a metallic-y color and you can really see a lot of swirls. Now, for example, this was done using a mica powder. You could see how there's swirls. You can see lines in there. You can see a lot of the metallic colors. That is with the powder. It's not going to give you that solid, dense color if that's what you're looking for. If you want that solid, dense one color all the way through, basically non-transparent, you got to use liquid. And that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use liquid. Now, I do like the powder on smaller projects where the epoxy is the thing that should be standing out, like cheese boards or serving trays or coasters or something like that. But this, I want the wood to stand out. So that's why I'm going to use a solid black color, because I don't want the epoxy overtaking the look of the wood. So now all I got to do is take this epoxy, go ahead and pour it in a bucket. Mixing it up is extremely important. You have to mix it perfectly. Everything in there has to be mixed around for it to activate and harden. I strongly suggest getting one of these. They're just little mixers. You can get them on Amazon. You can get them from basically anywhere. They're pretty cheap. Even if you're only going to do this one time, I still suggest getting one of these because you have to mix the epoxy perfect. And if you just have a spoon or a wooden dowel or anything and you're just mixing around, you might not mix all the way and it might not cure right. So just go ahead, get one of these. It's well worth it. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pour this whole thing in there. So if you do decide to get one of these, it just fits right onto the end of your drill. Tighten it down, and then mix it. Now the trick is, don't go too fast. You're not trying to spin this into like a flurry. Just go ahead and mix it around. It takes about 3 minutes or so. As soon as you think you got it pretty well mixed up, you want to add your dye. With the pigment, don't get too carried away. A little bit does go a very long way. All right, show you what this looks like. So that's what the epoxy looks like when it's all mixed up, nice and black like that. Okay, so when we're pouring the epoxy, one thing you have to watch out for is when you're pouring it, the wood will float and the epoxy will go under it, and you don't want that to happen. So you need to pin the wood down. Ideally, you could clamp it down, but a lot of times you're just not in the area to be able to clamp it down, or like this would just be awkward to clamp down. So you can just set heavy things on top of it. So I'm gonna go back to the weights, and I'm just gonna set them right on top of it, just like that. That's gonna prevent the wood from floating up and the epoxy from going underneath. All right, so the frame is built, everything is nice and clean. We got the wood weighted down, we got the epoxy mixed up, we got the little torch. There's nothing left to do but pour. So I'm just going to pour straight out of the bucket right into it. Oh, it's going all over the place. Okay, so made a bit of a mess. That's okay. So if you make a little mess like this, don't worry, just get a plastic scraper. You could just scrape it right back in there, because don't need to worry about it because we already put that protective layer of top coat down, so it's not going to affect the wood. All right, so far no leaks. Okay, let that settle for a second. Oh, no leaks, no leaks. This is nerve-wracking. All right, pour some more. Ah, shit, got a little carried away. Okay, so while this is settling out a little bit, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take just a little cup, scoop some epoxy out in there so I can fill in some of these small cracks. Because trying to pour out of the big bucket into these small little cracks, pretty much impossible. You're just gonna make a mess. So the nice thing about having a plastic scraper like this, there's a lot of little spider cracks going throughout this whole thing. So you just want to keep spreading it around until they are completely filled up. Because they're going to keep, it looks like emptying out, just because the air's escaping and the resin's going down. So you just want to keep refilling it, keep refilling it. It'll eventually fill up. Okay, so it looks like we have our first problem right here. It looks like it's leaking out of this little spot. So we're going to have to try to fix that. So it looks like a very slow, small leak, but it is leaking. So what I'm going to try to do is wipe it up a little bit and then stick some Gorilla Tape on it. We'll have to see if that works. Whenever you get a leak, there's not a lot you could do. You just got to try to do your best. Don't panic. Try to dry it a little bit at least. Stick some tape on it and hope. You just gotta really just hope the tape holds, which I don't know. It might not. More often than not, I don't know. But gotta try. And I think it's coming out of that big crack that was right there. So what I'm gonna do is stop filling that. And then we can come back to this when this is cured, redo this area, like retape that area up, and we can retouch it up. You can always come back later and do touch-ups. Looks like I might have stopped it at least a little bit. Hopefully. Well, that's all you can do. That's all you can do really is just try to tape it up, hope it holds. So it looks like there might even be another small leak coming through there. So it looks like what's happening is when a leak does happen, it's coming on the sides, not coming from the big dams. So what I'm gonna do is just go ahead, fill up the main part, and then we'll come back and touch up all those little cracks. Okay, so I just made a mistake that I was trying to warn everyone not to do. So what happened was, I took this weight off because I was trying to pour in there and I was trying to spread it around. But what happened was the wood floated up and then I poured more in there to fill up the whole, like the big canyon area. And then I put the weight back down onto it and it flooded out. And this happened. See how much it kind of flooded out all over the place? So that's not the end of the world. It kind of overflown a little bit like that. As long as it holds, it just means there's gonna be a lot more sanding afterwards. But I'll put up with a little extra sanding if this doesn't leak. I'll be more than happy to do that. Okay, so that's about it. There's not a lot you could do after you pour it. It kind of just, it is what it is after that. That's why the preparation for this is so important. So all I'm gonna do is hit it with the torch, pop some bubbles, and then come down all the time, check it, and just hope it doesn't spring a huge leak. Okay, so we're back. It's been about 4 days now and the epoxy is fully cured. The leaks ended up not being that bad. I was able to just shove some paper towels down in here between the wood and the actual frame. Ended up stopping just fine. But when it comes to leaks, it didn't go so well for this. This was a little project I was working on with the leftover epoxy from that. I just whipped together this frame real quick, poured it in here, and overnight leaked everywhere. My paper towels stuck to the table. The cup stuck to the table. There was a little piece of wood over here. Nah. The spatula or scraper thing that I was using, stuck. It's no big deal. It happens. This was just a little side project. I was just using some extra epoxy on. It happens. Now back to the table. So I let a couple things happen to this. I let some bubbles pop up. I didn't mess with them because I just wanted to show you what bubbles do look like. And I also let some bubbles start to cure a little bit, and then I hit them with the torch to show you what burnt epoxy looks like. Now I let that happen over top of the wood pieces because they're just going to get sanded down anyway. So it's not going to harm this at all, but it's going to allow you to see what it's going to look like. So these bubbles right here is what happens when you don't mess with the bubbles at all and you just let them go all the way through and they cure. This, on the other hand, is what happens when you let the bubbles go. For a little bit, they start to cure and then you try to burn them off. You get these real ugly dimples all the way through there. There's more, and there's some more right here. And this right here, that's actually concrete. So the concrete ended up being my own stupid mistake. Those concrete weights that I was using, I was just putting straight down on here and I wasn't even thinking they're gonna end up sticking. What I should have done was take a piece of wood, just a little block, wrap it in some packing tape or some Tyvek tape, put it down here first, then put the weight on top of that. Because that way the epoxy won't cure to the Tyvek tape, and that way when you're done, you just take it off, you can take the block right off, it's not gonna stick. But, oh well, hindsight's always 20/20, so the only thing you can do now is just move on, and I'm just gonna go ahead and take this out of the frame and get it ready for its next part. All right, so I'm just using a chisel and a screwdriver, I'm just wedging it under here, and it is loose. It is loose already. See how easy that was? Oh, nothing sticking. Tie-back tape really is good. Okay, now that we got the piece completely out of the mold, it looks really nice. The edges definitely do need a lot of cleaning up because the residue from the tape, the Gorilla Tape, did stick to it, so it does need a lot of cleaning up. Totally fine, totally expected. But everything else on it looks really, really good. The bottom of it, if you're wondering what that looks like, solid black. Now, this is because of a couple things. One, these weren't pushed all the way down flat, firm against the wood when I was pouring the epoxy, which I knew because we had that little problem where the piece floated up and I pushed it back down. So epoxy did get under it. Now, if you're looking to avoid that on your project, just make sure these are already perfectly flat on the bottom and you have a lot of weight or they're clamped firmly down. That way epoxy won't go underneath of them. So if that does happen to you and you do want the wood exposed on the bottom, it's no big deal. Just go ahead, sand it down until the wood is exposed again. But now that this is all cured up, it's out of the mold, it's ready for the next step. And the next step is actually flattening the top. Now in an ideal world, the way you would do that is use a router. You can use a CNC machine router, you could use a hand router with a jig. That's the easiest way to do it. You would just make a jig that the router would sit on and it would just go over it and flatten it completely out. Now, a lot of people don't have a router and you can still flatten this. All you have to do is sand it. It's just gonna be a lot of sanding. And that's the way I'm gonna do it. Because like I said, most people do not have a router. So I'm not gonna use one either. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab my sander and spend hours on this. It's gonna take a long time. But I am gonna go ahead and start off with probably a 40 grit sandpaper to really just take off a lot of this, and then move to an 80 grit, 120 grit, and so on and so forth. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab my sander, set it up, and get to it. Okay, so I just finished sanding both sides with a 40 grit, then an 80 grit. Now I'm to the point I want to touch up some little areas. Remember when we were doing a deep pour and I said we're going to have to come back and touch up some areas? This is the time to do it. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So these are some of the areas I'm talking about. Some of the spider cracks that were running down the edge still have some little holes in them, along with some of the areas where the epoxy went in and it kind of settled and got some little holes in it. It's no big deal. Also, an area I want to touch up is down this main vein right here. If you could see, the epoxy settled a little weird. It got kind of these little dents in it. We're going to have to fix those as well. And also sometimes when you're sanding, you're going to notice you're going to get these little pockets within your epoxy. These are just little bubbles that formed in the epoxy. There was nothing you could do about it until you sanded them down. So what we're going to do is get the sawdust out of here and fill it in. So to fix these little areas is actually really easy. First thing you want to do is just make sure this area is super clean. Vacuum it off as much as you can and blow it off. If you have an air compressor, perfect. If you don't, vacuum it 10 times as much. Or you can even get like one of those little cans of air and blow out all of these tiny little dots. You just want to get all that sawdust up out of there. Then, after everything is really nice and clean, mix up a little bit of tabletop epoxy. It has to be tabletop. Deep pour will not work for this, but color match it as close as you possibly can. This is where you might run into an issue if you use like a really bizarre color or you mix a couple different colors to get something crazy. Color matching that might be very difficult, but since this is just a jet black, super easy for me. Now when you're applying this, if you have a syringe, that's perfect. But I don't have a syringe. All I'm going to use is this little piece of wood. It's got kind of a point on it because you want to be able to apply a very tiny bit at a time. So this is all we're doing. I'm just getting this tiny bit and just kind of dabbing it into there. This is where a syringe would come in really handy because you can just inject it straight down into the holes. But like I said, I don't have one, so I'm just going to do this. It works. Now this is actually going to take a while to do because it's going to settle down into these cracks and you're just going to have to come back and do it again. So for the little bubbles that happen in the actual epoxy, we're just going to follow the same thing. Just Take a little bit, dab it in there. And now for this part where the epoxy settled a little different, I'm just going to take some of the epoxy and kind of smear it right on top. Now, like I said, you're gonna have to come back and do this a couple times because the first one I did is already starting to settle in there and it's already starting to get new cracks and little holes in there. So I'm just gonna have to come back and refill it in. When you think you have all of the little cracks and little dots and little holes filled in, come back every 10 minutes or so and keep checking it. Make sure you keep a little bit of epoxy on hand so that way you can touch up any little areas and just keep doing that for a while. Then all you have to do is just wait for this to dry and then we'll come back, sand it off. Okay, so I waited 48 hours for that epoxy to dry, then I came back and sanded it all down. And I also finished all my rough sanding. I started with the 40 grit, then I went to the 80 grit and 120 grit. Now I'm going to use my final sandpaper, which is 180 grit. But before you use your final sandpaper, you want to wet the wood. You wet the wood so the grain opens up and it stands up. And when it stands up, you can go ahead and sand it all down and it's going to be perfectly smooth. I'm also going to leave the sides like this. I hit it with the 120 and I left it blotchy. I think it looks really cool. And for the bottom, I'm just going to leave it like this. For one, it's perfectly flat, so I don't have to worry about flattening it. Two, do you remember how brittle this was? I was able to just slam it down and it cracked it. So having this little extra base of epoxy down here is just going to do nothing but help. Now when you wet the wood to sand it, just use a spray bottle, spritz it a little bit, or just a wet rag. You don't need to get this thing soaked. Okay, so we finally finished sanding. We took it all the way up to 180 grit, and now we're ready for the final step. The final step is the finish. Now this part can actually be pretty confusing, trying to figure out which finish you should use. When I very first started getting into woodworking, it was very overwhelming trying to figure out which finish to use and when to use it, because if you start looking it up, everyone's got a really strong opinion about which one to use and when to use it. So for this, I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. I'm going to break it down to just two different kind of finishes, and they're pretty much the most popular ones when it comes to river tables or any big project. One is Odie's and the other one is Rubio's. Now I've used them both on very similar projects. In the look of them, honestly, I think they look pretty much the same. But for the finish and the durability of it, I think Rubio has a little bit more of a durable finish on it. So I would say if the piece you're working on is going to be in a more of a high traffic area and is going to get a lot of use, I'd say lean more towards the Rubio. One huge caution I want to say when it comes to Rubio, make sure you know which one you're buying because they come in tinted colors, and natural does not mean clear. You have to get pure if you want clear. Don't make the same mistake I did and buy the natural thinking is this going to give you the natural wood look. It's not, it's tinted. You have to buy the pure. Okay, so if you're using Rubio, this is how it works. You mix it up in a 3-to-1. It's the hardener in the base. Then you just go ahead, pour it on. Remember, a little bit of this goes a long ways. And then you just spread it around with a scraper or a car scraper, whatever you have. You just want to spread it around. You can go right over top the epoxy. It's no big deal. It's not going to hurt it. It's also not going to change the color of it. It's not going to do anything. Then you take one of these little white non-abrasive scrub pads and you're going to scrub it in. Now this is actually really important. Don't scrub the epoxy because these will scratch it. Even though these say they're non-scratch, it will scratch the epoxy. You can still go over, just go light, but don't try to scrub in the epoxy. So you can go over it if you're trying to spread it out more, just don't scrub it. What you're trying to do is just scrub this into all the little pores of the wood. I'm also going to do the edges. Then after you have everything scrubbed in, what you want to do is wait about 5 minutes, let it kind of soak in there. Then after you waited about 5 minutes, come back with some cloths and you want to wipe off all the excess. Wipe it off really, really good. Now, one really important thing when it comes to finishes, if you're using a linseed oil finish like Rubio is, you have to discard your rags in an open area. You have to put them out, let them dry, because if you combine them all together, the linseed has a tendency just to burst into flames. Bourbon Moth actually did a really cool video about this and about how they will just randomly burst into flames. I'll leave a link to that down below. But you just want to go ahead and wipe off all the excess. Now at the bottom of yours has exposed wood. You want to repeat this process on the bottom side as soon as possible. Wait a few hours for the top to dry, flip it, and then do the bottom. But since the bottom of mine is all epoxy, I don't need to worry about it. But now that we have the finish on here, I'm just going to let it sit for about 48 hours, let it dry. Okay, so that's it. This thing's fully dried and cured, and I think it looks absolutely beautiful. Ooh, I am pretty. I hope I was able to show everyone out there that these are not as hard to make as a lot of people make them out to be. And that if you have just a couple tools and some time, you can make one of these. And I completely believe that you can. And if you ever have any problems or questions, please feel free to reach out to me. But until next time, I will see you later. Wait, you just gonna act like you didn't forget to put legs on me? Okay, for the legs, what I'm actually gonna do is teach myself how to weld. So I'm actually just gonna weld my own legs. I think it would actually be kind of, but for anyone else, the easiest way to get legs is just basically buy them offline, but they are really expensive. To be a little bit cheaper, I would say just go to like a garage sale or a flea market and find a table that's pretty beat up, that's cheap, that has nice legs, and just swap them out. Or like what I did the last couple times is I just repurposed one of my tables I have in the house. That way you kind of have already the legs that kind of fit the style of your house, and just swap out the tabletop with something like this. But until next time, I will see everyone later. Thank you for watching. I really genuinely appreciate it. Oh, you're just gonna walk away without a care in the world while I'm over here legless, just rolling? Oh, this is stupid. God, I hate that guy so much. Will somebody give me some legs?